Hello everyone, this is David with Inspired Precision, and I want to thank you for joining us. In this video, we're going to be taking another look at the Umarex Zelos, and I'm going to provide you with an in-depth repair, adjustment, and tuning guide. If you enjoy this type of content, please like this video and add a comment or question. I'm going to try to answer every question that you guys post. If you feel compelled to subscribe, please do, and then you won't miss all our videos coming in the future. As you can see, my Zelos here is currently without a scope. You may choose to leave your scope installed. It's not really going to affect how we're doing or what we're doing here today. It just makes it a little bit easier to move around. I'm going to also show you how to degas your Zelos, but this is really only required if you're going to be tuning the regulator down, and we'll get to that later on in the video. Adjustments that you can actually make with the Umarex Zelos are your trigger shoe position, so that's going to be the trigger shoe rotation and location up and down on the actual trigger bar. Your trigger travel, so what we would call the first stage. Your trigger sear weight, your actual hammer spring adjustment that's located underneath the butt pad here, underneath the stock, and lastly, the tuning of the regulator. Those are the things that you can do. There's really not much else. Let's get right into the adjustments. So before you start, you may want to assemble some tools. We don't need a ton, but I'll go through what we do need. So you're going to need a 4mm hex key. That's going to be for the buttstock screw. You're going to need a 3mm hex key for the front pick rail clamp screws. You'll need a 2.5mm hex key for the cheek pad screws. A 2mm hex key for your stock screws. A 1.5mm hex key for your trigger shoe and sear adjustment. You will need a small flathead for your regulator adjustment, a large flathead for your hammer spring, and then optional but recommended is going to be some blue Loctite. That's going to be to set your trigger shoe set screw if you need it. But most importantly for your sear adjustment set screw, so you can maintain your sear weight and so it doesn't loosen up over time. Lastly, another optional tool is a 3/8 inch drill bit, and this is to put a hole in the stock assembly so you can adjust the hammer spring without taking the stock off. I also have some L wrenches here, these hex keys. You can use any type of hex keys. They don't have to be fancy like these ones here. Now that you've got your tools assembled, let's get into the actual adjustment guide. First, we're going to look at the trigger shoe. So there is a set screw here, and adjusting the trigger shoe is really simple. Mine is already set to where I'd like it, so I'm not going to adjust it, but you will use a 1.5mm hex key. You're going to loosen the set screw right here on the back of the trigger shoe. You'll loosen that up. You'll be able to change the rotation of the trigger, and you'll be able to set the position as desired. Take your 2.5mm hex key, and you'll see that we've got a screw here and we've got a screw here. So what you'll do is you will loosen those screws. Those screws will likely stay right in that cheek pad, and you can set that aside. We won't be doing anything with the screws on the breech or the breech assembly. So just leave all those screws there. Next, you want to remove the stock. So if you notice here, we've got 6 screws on each side. We will take a 2mm hex wrench and take all of those screws out. Alright, so with all those 12 screws, your stock assembly will fall right off. We'll set that aside. The manual included with your Zelos shows you how to adjust the trigger travel and the sear weight. Both are adjusted where I want them on this rifle, but let's go over how to do it. You're going to, you see here, there is a E-clip. You take that E-clip off the pin and you set those aside. And then what you'll do is you'll loosen up this nut right here, and you will either tighten or loosen this linkage bar, and that will adjust your travel of your trigger. As you can see, it's moving based on how long or short that trigger bar is. When the linkage is at the desired length, you will reinstall this pin. You will put the E-clip on and make sure you almost want to do this in a plastic bag so you don't lose that clip. But reinstall that pin, reinstall that clip, and snug up that nut again. Next, if you look on the bottom, if you see this set screw right here, that is going to be your sear adjustment. I've got mine set probably in the middle of the range, and you're going to tighten or loosen this screw to adjust the sear. Note that an adjustment too light can cause an accidental discharge if the rifle's bumped hard or dropped. You never want to dry fire this with no air in the cylinder because it may harm the poppet valve. I have used blue Loctite on this screw so that my sear adjustment doesn't change over time. Also to note, adjustment of the sear actually changes the first stage trigger pull length. So you may need to adjust your trigger pull length again, depending on how far you adjusted your sear. The hammer spring can be adjusted by turning this screw with a large flathead. About flush is stock. It could be turned 5 full rotations and still engage the sear, but I recommend adjusting this only by half turns, half rotations. This means you will get 10 settings out of your hammer spring. Of course, you'll need a chronograph to actually tune the hammer spring properly. That is actually a topic for another video. It gives you a little demo on what we might do in the future for actual tuning with a chronograph. Using your 4mm hex key, loosen the screw on the butt pad. You don't have to take it all the way out, just loosen it up. You'll want to slide the pad off the stock, being careful not to lose your little Umarex rubber piece. If you take your 3/8 inch drill bit, you can see that I have put a hole straight through this section of the stock. And you can see when I go to reinstall the stock that I'll be able to access the hammer spring from that hole without disassembly of this stock. If you don't put a hole in that, then you'll have to take this stock out take the stock off rather, every single time that you want to adjust that hammer spring. When all of your adjustments or repairs are completed, you can follow the previous instructions on disassembly backwards to reassemble your Zelos. I'm going to do that all right now. As you can see, I'm at pretty low pressure, but we're going to tune this regulator to around 1900 PSI. So first you're going to degas your rifle. So the easiest way to degas your rifle is to take off your cylinder, and that's just unscrewing it. You're going to hear that your tank will actually stay charged with whatever amount of air you had in it. It'll lose a little bit. We're going to pump this up a little bit while we've got it off of the rifle. But you can see that these are hot swappable. And set your tank aside. My regulator here is back to 0, so we don't have to degas anything. But if you're going to have to degas it, you'll take your 2.5 millimeter and you will loosen up that set screw to degas the rest of the plenum. So once your Zelos is empty, you're going to tighten up that degassing screw, and next you will loosen this nut on your regulator. So you'll just loosen that up a little bit. After your nut is loose, you can take your small flathead screwdriver and you can tighten your regulator just until it is snug. Once you meet resistance, stop. It really doesn't take much pressure at all. Now we are going to pump up our tank and we're going to reinstall. So I'll pump my tank up and I'll be right back. As you see here, I've got, I don't know, around 3,500 PSI in my tank, and I am going to install this back on the rifle. Now, because your regulator is set closed, you shouldn't actually hear the plenum fill. You should not really hear very much when you screw your tank back on. All right, just a little bit of gas going into the valve. Now, if you need to move this front pick rail out of the way, you're going to have to use a 3 millimeter hex wrench and to get that out of the way. I think stock configuration, they're slid up quite a bit further. So you're going to take your small flathead, and watching the gauge, we're going to put this rifle back on safe because I forgot to do that. But you're going to watch this gauge and you will loosen this screw until your gauge reads about where you want it. In this case, I'm going to put it right on 1900. So you can see that it came up maybe at 900 now. Let's see, we're at approximately, keep going. Maybe we're at 12, 13, 14. Let's see, we're coming up. Let's look. Maybe we're at about 17. Let's go a little bit further. Okay, so that I think is around about 1900, maybe a touch more, but that's where I'm going to keep it. We're going to tighten up this nut as tight as we can get it by hand. You don't want a tool on that, and that's going to preserve the setting on your regulator. Well, that's going to about do it for this adjustment video. If you ever need to repair your rifle, do any adjustments, do any tuning, I hope this guide has been beneficial to you. Alright guys, so in the future I may go over a tuning video where we're adjusting the regulator, where we're adjusting the hammer spring so we can get the most power for hunting, which means unfortunately less shots per fill And you can also tune this rifle for target and for plinking. So that means more shots per fill. So adjusting the regulator, adjusting the hammer spring, you can do a lot with this rifle. You can set it up exactly the way that you want it. So we'll see in a future video if we can get to that. This was David from Inspire Precision, and I just want to thank you for sticking with us, watching our Zelos adjustment, repair, and tuning guide. And I want to remind you guys to break out of your comfort zone, learn a new skill, and have a great day.